First of all, thank you all for joining us for this. We've been doing the weekly discussion group for about 3.5 years. This is the first time we're doing it online, so please bear with us with the discussion group that has been running weekly for 3.5 years. We still constantly look for ways to improve. I think with this, we will have a lot to improve on by next week. As I mentioned in the email, we're also planning to put this video, it's recorded, we're planning to put it on YouTube. So if that's gonna negatively affect you in any way, if your face is on it, please turn your camera off. And I should make an announcement that we were planning from next Friday to have a panel discussion every Friday in central London. The first one was gonna be with Dr. Andrew Bernstein and Douglas Murray. The second was going to be with Nikos and Zubi. Those two have already been posted and tickets started selling. The third one, which we haven't actually announced yet, was going to be with Dr. Salmieri and Douglas Murray. And we had a lot planned. Unfortunately, we obviously can't do that yet. We are postponing that. So the events, you can't buy tickets for that anymore. If you bought a ticket, you will obviously be refunded. You might still see them online, but they are not happening as planned from next week. Now for tonight's topic, that's another topic, something else that we've decided on a long time ago, but it's I don't think people are interested in much other than the virus, but this, the reason, and Ayn Rand's entire philosophy, as she said, is a philosophy for living on Earth. The ideas are not connected from reality, and they don't stop applying once there is an emergency situation, such as what we're living in today. So this situation, actually, even when there is no global pandemic, it seems that we live in a time where it's seemingly more important to express views than actually to go through the trouble of the work that it takes to form those views. So I mean, if you look at social media, everybody has a view on everything that's being done, whether it's good or bad. Everybody has a view. Now the question is, do we have the knowledge required to form a view? And with something like this global pandemic, like a virus that we can all catch, it's not a topic that we can just put to the side and say it doesn't matter. So we do need, within our very limited context of knowledge, most of us are not experts in this field, we need to form some sort of view and understand how we as individuals act within this new situation. So I will go to our three speakers to tell us what they think about this issue. And then if you have a question or comment, please use the hand raising function. So Dr. Salmieri, would you like to start?
So you asking how I think we should be acting about the COVID pandemic in particular, or I'm not sure exactly what you want me to comment on here.
Well, how do we know how to think about something like this, considering this is for the people who are not experts in the field of,
Which means for me and for all of us, right? And even for most doctors who aren't experts in this particular subdiscipline. So one thing is, I have a talk from some years ago on thinking objectively, the theme of which is knowledge is work. And I think you really have to respect and realize that fact. What is causing this disease is not something you can just see. How it spreads, and likewise for anything in medicine, it's not just, it mystically writes itself onto your mind. It has to be figured out. And everything in life that we know has to be worked out, figured out. Knowledge takes work. Work to find the evidence, work to evaluate the evidence. And that work occurs within a division of labor economy. You have to be independent-minded. You have to think for yourself, but you can't do all the thinking that's required to know all the things you know by yourself, need to know by yourself. You have to rely on a division of labor, which means that you are evaluating experts, evaluating the kinds of reasons they give you, but in a way where you're not, able to know the thing fully independently of them. You know it because you can tell that they have good reasons and they're doing their job. And I'll recommend another talk of mine that's on AOI's webpage, How to Be an Objective Consumer of Science, that's about this. And I think you have to have that whole context in mind when you're thinking about this issue. You have to think this, understanding what's going on, what's going to happen, what are the likely outcomes of different courses of action for me, for public policy, etc., requires a tremendous amount of knowledge, which requires a tremendous amount of work that's been done or is being failing to be done by a tremendous number of people. And so you have to think a lot about assessing individual claims in light of an assessment of the medical schools, the medical establishment, the various medical organizations in the world, what they know, how good they are at telling things. And I think we now in modern Britain or modern America, versus living in the 1200s or 200 BC or wherever else, have a lot of reason to be confident that there is a real science of medicine. There are people who really practice it, including epidemiology, who know a lot, that whatever flaws there might be in the credentialing system, in the establishment, and I think there are a lot of flaws, that there's a tremendous amount of actual real knowledge there. And the system is good enough to elevate people who really know what they're talking about a lot of things. And so you have to see who are the experts, what are their credentials. I think you should have a considerable amount of confidence in them on the broad strokes of things like what's causing this virus, how does it spread, what is its contagion rate, and so forth, what is its case fatality rate, including confidence in that they're resolving the things they don't know yet over time. But I then also think you want to think about, what biases are there to panic, to recommending more controls rather than freedom, and to notice that, and you have to take account of, you have to have an assessment of that whole kind of system, that whole knowledge economy, and have that in mind as you assess the evidence you're given and what to do about it. So that's part of what I think valuing reason here means. I wasn't a week ago, but I am now, staying inside for a while. I'm back by law, I have to do it, but I think this week I would be doing it anyway until we learn a little bit more. But I'm, reading what comes out and trying to figure things out as it goes.
Thanks, Greg. And Andy, your thoughts?
Well, this is way outside my field. We should have gotten Amish the Ubiquitous here, Dr. How do you pronounce his last name? Amelja?
Adalja.
Adelja? He used to follow me around. He was the first Bernstein groupie in the mid-90s. He followed me around from lecture to lecture. I called him Amish the Ubiquitous. He was a great kid back then. He's a really good guy now. And his, not only an MD, but his specialty is in infectious diseases, right? So he's the good guy.
And not only infectious diseases, but he's one of the leading experts on pandemic preparedness. So this is, in a way, his moment. And I've certainly learned a lot from him. So if we're talking about experts, Amish Adalja is someone who really everyone in the world is turning to for guidance.
Well, I'm going to have to start following him around, Greg. Hope he can call me Andy the Ubiquitous. Anyhow, the one point I wanted to make is I think we need to really, reach out to the culture here and emphasize how important it is to support freedom of the mind. We look at, say, it was Louis Pasteur, who were one of the first to develop the germ theory of disease. You look at Jonas Salk and the vaccine for polio. Look at Maurice Hillman, the researcher at Merck, who was credited with saving more lives than any scientist in the 20th century. He and his team at Merck developed vaccines for I don't remember how many diseases. It's not an accident that these kind of medical advances, were reached in the 19th and 20th century when the principle of individual rights had developed some currency in the Western world. And it was in France, Britain, the United States. The principle of individual rights, of course, protects freedom of the mind, because if your life belongs to you, then it follows logically that your mind belongs to you, and you can't be suppressed as long as you're not fomenting crime or the initiation of force. You can't be suppressed by the religious or secular authorities. So, the advances we need to identify the causes of these kinds of pandemics, the cures, the treatments, it absolutely relies on freedom of the mind. And Ayn Rand, Steam, and Atlas Shrugged redounds in a million different respects, including in the life and death field of medicine. So that's the main point I want to make. In these kinds of emergency life and death situations, the last thing we want to do is to move towards socialism. This is where we need capitalism, individual rights, and freedom of the mind all the more. It's literally life and death. Because under socialism, full socialism, real socialism, not the mixed economies we see in the United States or Britain or Sweden or places like that. Full socialism is National Socialism and communism. And if your theories, no matter how crackpot, I'm thinking of Lysenko in the Soviet Union, no matter how crackpot his theories were in horticulture, he convinced the greatest scientist of all that he was right, the greatest scientist being Comrade Stalin, of course. And Stalin then, mandated this crackpot theory by law, and any rational scientists who disagreed were killed as heretics. And Soviet horticulture and agriculture was set back by many years. Not that it was very good to start with. So the last thing we need is more and more government control over the field of medicine, medical research, and so on. Now we need freedom of the mind even more, with so many lives at stake. So I'll be short and sweet. That's the point I want to make.
Just as a concrete under what, Andy, you're saying, Lysenko is a great example, but we don't even have to go back that far, right? So there's this Dr. Li Wenliang, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, in China, who was the first to sound the alarm about this disease, and he was muzzled. And so we're talking about a current
regime. Didn't he? What, did they kill him?
Well, he's died of the virus. I don't know if there was any kind of foul play involved. I don't know of any evidence of that. But he did eventually die of the virus, probably because he was trying to fight it when no one else was on the front lines of it. But in any case,
he's a hero. As a man's hero.
He's a hero, and he was silenced, right? So if his voice were allowed to be heard earlier, it might have been possible to do more surveillance on this virus and to contain it better. It's unlikely it could have been contained, but contained better than it was, and the rest of the world could have been more prepared. So this is a case of a current authoritarian government, one that's being praised actually by too many people for its dealing with the virus, but one of its first actions was to suppress free speech that was trying to warn people about this.
That's a good example.
Nikos.
Yes, so the theme that keeps coming back to my mind, there was I think an open talk by Yaron Brook some years ago called something like Objectivism is radical and very difficult to apply in action, something like that. The same thing comes to my mind about being reasonable in these times. And I have to say, I've also been disappointed with myself, because it's very easy in such a situation where there's all this influx of information, and usually bad information. It's very easy to lose this grip of reality and go in a dark kind of panic mode, or in a mode that or to actually go to extremes. One moment tell to yourself, well, it's nothing, we're gonna forget it in 6 weeks, and then next 5 minutes you try to figure out how you stockpile stuff from the supermarket. So, and if reason is difficult, or even among people like ourselves who want to believe that we have a good kind of grip on what thinking rationally requires, then we realize how difficult it is for everyone to apply these principles to issues that we would consider as self-evident. As, for example, how can't you see that we need, for example, private initiatives to bring medicine in the market or keep the supermarkets working? So that's the one thing. It's how difficult it is in this situation to apply actually independent thinking and decide what is the pieces of information I need. For example, for the last 2 hours, I was trying to read articles about chloroquine. There's this theory nowadays that there might be this particular antivirus. And then I stopped myself and said, look, this is just, you're just kidding yourself. You're not going to understand anything from these articles because you're not an expert. So just, keep your calm. If this is indeed a solution, then the people who should figure it out will figure it out. And the second thing I want to kind of throw on the table as an issue of discussion is good news that can come out of it and coping mechanisms. So in the first days, I was in a bad mood. And I would try to think, for example, that my grandmother, when I was reading her diaries from the occupied Athens, she would literally walk out the door and she would find dead bodies. And these were diaries that she wrote for herself. It's not like a sentimental thing. It was the reality. So when you put this into perspective and you realize that, you know, a lot of people have been through very difficult things, and when things get tough, it's the time to stand up and at least try to be reasonable. And at least try to think clearly. But I have to say that within 2 days, I found myself in, I don't know how many mutual aid and solidarity, let's say, WhatsApp groups, people flooding us with, in a good way, with emails. Look, if you need anything, I know you live alone. Let me know if you need something, or these things that go around in the neighborhoods. And I think that shows that people are indeed benevolent, and most people are indeed good and are able to stand up on the occasion. Because quite often we hear this thing that, oh, people need coercion because otherwise they would never help their neighbors or whatever. I think the big good news, the big takeaway from these days is that actually people do stand up. Most people do stand up to the occasion. Of course, we don't know. It's not as, yet it's not as critical as, you know, my grandmother's days in the occupied Athens under the Nazis. But I think we can get some good positive messages about how people are reacting to it, and how most people are able to kind of keep their mind with this.
Thanks, Nikos. So the only person with his hand raised is Alejandro. We do have a question in the chat as well. So we'll prioritize the people who have their hand raised and want to ask a live question, and then we'll go to the chat. And of course, if anybody else has a live question, please raise your hand. Alejandro.
Hi all. Rasi, can I ask also, can I ask a question on values?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, basically, one of the themes that has come up in these meetups quite often is the issue of principles, and very specifically moral principles. And it has been really tough for us to differentiate between principles, standards, and sometimes like a set of rules. So I was wondering if you could give us some approach, some way on how to approach that question, and to see how to differentiate principles against, and to see how can you integrate them into a concept.
So you said you mentioned a few different things you wanted related. Could you say them again? Values, standard principles, and rules? Okay, you're nodding. All right, so put rules aside for a moment. Values are things that you act to achieve. A principle isn't necessarily related to action. I mean, everything ultimately in life is related to action, but a principle could be like, you know, a law of physics, right? That's not telling you what to do, it's telling you how things work in the world, right? Whereas values are specifically things that you are committed to pursuing. And if they're objective values, they're things that you're committed to pursuing rationally because they support your life. Values require a standard. So there's going to be an ultimate value. If you have more than one value, and you're going to say like, why is this thing a value and that other thing's a value, but this third thing is not a value? It's because you're evaluating them by a standard. So a standard is something that's involved in evaluation. It's set by an ultimate value, to which the other values are going to be means. But a standard of value is, in effect, an abstract statement of what your ultimate value is, which abstract statement you're then going to use to evaluate concrete specific values to see whether they can be parts of or means to that ultimate value. And a standard of value is a principle, in the sense that a principle is a very wide abstraction. That's how I understand the word principle. It's named for the widest abstraction. So a standard of value will be a principle of morality. So those are how those three relate. And then you mentioned rules. Rules I think of as, you know, concrete pieces of advice. When in this situation, do this. And so I think when you're contrasting values to principles, it would be something like, there's a principle that honesty is good, or that one shouldn't fake reality but should respect reality, and that the real is unreal, and so forth. That's the principle. Don't lie is a rule, and rules are kind of, you know, concrete. Don't take this action. Do take that action, and that's not a rule. Most of those kind of rules are not always or, you know, don't hold without exception. Whereas the principles, if they're formulated properly, are meant to hold without exception. That's how I interpret the distinction between them. So, I mean, all of these are words that one could use, you know, somewhat differently in different people's vocabularies. But rule connotes concreteness, whereas principle connotes abstractness when they're applied to moral things, moral guidance. And a rule will tell you concretely, do this, don't do that. Whereas a principle will tell you that the types of way to behave in very broad abstractions that you can then apply to specific cases to determine types of action. So you can call, you know, you can use the terms interchangeably sometimes, but when you're using rule, you're focusing on the concreteness, and when you are using principle, you're focusing on the abstractness.
Andy and Nikos, do you have anything to add?
I thought Greg did a great job. I have nothing to add. Go ahead, Nikos.
No, I don't have. Yeah, Greg, I think, did a good job. So obviously, he's a go-to guy for these questions.
All right, thanks. So we will go to the chat. Fabian asks, why can't we have socialism and free speech for doctors at the same time?
Why can't we have socialism and free speech for doctors at the same time? What about free speech for the rest of the population? We need to be clear on what socialism is. You know, today that term is widely misused. I mean, there's this popular misconception in the world that, for example, Scandinavian countries are socialist and that the United States is capitalist, and that's wrong on both counts. They're both mixed economies with generous elements of individual rights and government controls. I mean, as Ayn Rand pointed out, the essence of capitalism is the principle of individual rights. You know, your life belongs to you. The essence of socialism, full socialism, real socialism, is that your life does not belong to you. Your life belongs to the state. Your life has been socialized. And the influence of Hegel here is Kant and Hegel, especially Hegel in this regard, has been profound. But in full socialism, there's no freedom of speech for doctors or anybody else. If somebody's asking the question, well, can't there be free speech for doctors in Sweden, let's say, or in Great Britain, or in the other, Scandinavian countries like Denmark and so on that are often thought of as socialist? Yeah, there could be free speech in those countries. Those are not socialist countries. Those are mixed economies, just like the United States. Perhaps the Scandinavian countries list a little more heavily towards the socialist element, and the United States perhaps a little bit more towards the capitalist element, maybe, although we're not that far, in the US, we're not that far behind Scandinavia, and we're catching up. But the point, of course, is the principle of individual rights, even if it doesn't get a lot of lip service anymore, it exists in these countries. You know, in Scandinavia, there's freedom of religion, there's freedom of speech, the borders are open, not that you could go anywhere, not that you could get into any other countries, even in the economic realm. You know, Saab and Volvo and Ericsson and IKEA, they're privately owned and operated for profit. You walk down the streets of Stockholm or Oslo and you got all these stores and shops, you know, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, they're privately owned and operated for profit. It's a great deal of, you know, capitalist elements there. So yeah, absolutely, free speech can exist for doctors and anybody else in a socialist country, if by socialism you mean the mixed economy welfare states of Scandinavia, Britain, and the United States. But if you're asking about real socialism, full socialism, where your life belongs to the state and your life has been socialized under the National Socialism or Nazis or the communists, then no, because you could speak out only by privilege from the dictator, as long as your ideas, you know, can coincide with the ideas of the state. If they do not, you could be killed or sent to a gulag or, you know, gas chamber, or so on and so forth. So if we're talking about real socialism, can freedom of speech for doctors or anybody else coexist with real socialism? No.
The principle that makes free speech right and that you need to rely on to really properly defend it is the same principle that makes free markets right, and that you need to rely on to defend it. So yeah, you could have a country that for a time, maybe for a long time, has a socialized medical system like Great Britain does, and a relatively free economy in other areas, and a relatively free speech, although not, you know, as free as it should be in England. But it's because the country and the people in it are being inconsistent. And if we really think about what reasons are there to allow free speech, they're at root the same reason to allow freedom in the medical industry and freedom in every other industry. And what are those reasons? The reasons are that all the values on which our lives depend and that make our lives worth living come from reason, and reason only can operate under freedom. And so whenever you constrict our freedom, whether it's our freedom to speak, which is a particularly crucial one, or our freedom to trade with one another, you are shutting off avenues to thought. You are paralyzing or making unuseful thought in a certain area. Making that thought unuseful, negating it, making people unable to act on it, ultimately paralyzes thinking in that area, because people can't afford the cognitive resources to be thinking through and daydreaming about things they'll never be able to implement. And so you shut down reason's application to that area. And as a result, there is less produced in that area, less value in that area of life atrophies. And I think that's happened to the medical field and the education fields the world over. There's still some freedom some places, and, you know, it's not like there's no medicine, but I spoke earlier about problems in the medical industry, and that's a major one. I think it's the reason why we're not more prepared than we are for the current situation. And shutting down free speech is a particularly egregious case of this, because free speech applies to everything. So if you think about, there are like arteries, you know, that's constricting a central artery, and through which reason applies to all the different areas of life. So when you shut down free speech, you know, have really radical problems. But it's the same ultimate reason to be pro-free speech and pro-free market, and including pro-free market in medicine. And though some countries exist for, you know, considerable amount of time with that contradiction, it's a contradiction to be for one and against the other.
One thing I'd like to add to that is, so seeing what happens in Greece. So in Greece, the measures have been quite draconian, and it's very interesting how quickly a government can shift towards full-on authoritarianism, and not only in practice, not in terms of saying, look, we have a crisis, and like, I mean, we can discuss what would constitute a crisis, which would involve, for example, the government taking away some of our individual rights. But the tone of the prime minister, who is supposedly also a liberal, I mean, if you've read Atlas Shrugged, it's straight from part 3, head of state Thompson, what's his name. So it uses terms such as people who have an action, who commit antisocial actions, and by antisocial actions, he means daring to open your cafe or daring to open your small business or something like that, will have to punish in 2 ways. They're criminals against the law, and they're criminals against human life. So what I was thinking when I saw this is like, you know what, when life goes back to normal, we have to work twice as hard to fight the good battle of ideas, because it just takes literally 5 days for a semi-free society to just go down into almost full-scale authoritarianism. And again, it's what I said in the introduction. It's very difficult to think reasonably, and think independently. So a lot of people are afraid to say that, wait, what is happening here? This is something very creepy, because they say, well, look, everyone is panicking about this virus. It's difficult to put in the hierarchy of values, and which is, I think, why Alessandra's question was good. Like, what is the standard here? Is the standard as few people as possible die, opposed to the standard at some point life needs to go back to normal, and when we go back to the world out there, it needs to be not a place which is irrecognizable. So I think these are the difficult questions. But my experience in the last days has been, I've really been creeped out about how easy it is to go from a semi-free society, which is not though built on let's say stable principles, to a prime minister which can sound like Atlas Shrugged Part 3.
Yeah, and this is a unique London Ayn Rand meetup because we have many people from outside London, but those of us in London might, if the reports in some mainstream media outlets are correct, we might in London experience some of that from Friday. There are some reports that there's going to be a lockdown, basically something like what's going on in Italy, and people will not be allowed to leave their homes without a good reason.
So just to link it to Fabian's question. So my point was, I mean, there is this quote which is, I think, supposedly said by Washington, that a government that has the power to give you everything can take everything from you, something like that. Which, by the way, it's not even a real quote by Washington. But anyway, but it's something like that. What I see happening: a government that can tell you your healthcare and whether, when you get fever and cough and difficulty of breathing, whether your life or death situation is based on me. This is a government that just like that can tell you, you know what, life as you knew it is over because I said so. And actually, if you dare to do something different, then I can send the police to arrest you. Anyway, so we have another question. So we will go to Joseph, who has his hand raised, and then we will go to another question in the chat. So Joseph, Razi, can you unmute Joseph?
So there were a couple of things here. One is that personally, I think that this is a very severe crisis because so many businesses are going to take a massive hit from what's going on. So that's number one. Why do you think that this will go back to normal? And number two is how do you see the prospects of individual rights for the future?
Sorry, what was the first question again, Joseph?
Why do we think it'll go back to normal? Or what does going back to normal mean? If it means every restaurant and shop that's closed, right? So I live in Jersey City, in Hoboken, and Jersey City, all the restaurants and such are closed down. If back to normal means all the ones that are closed now are going to open up again in a few weeks, and none of them are going to go bankrupt or out of business, it's not going to go back to normal. I think some of them will go out of business. And some people's livelihoods will really be affected, and the economy will take a hit, and so forth. So it's not going to go back to normal in the sense that it'll be as though nothing happened. But if by normal you mean within the range of ways that the economy and society has functioned over the last 20 years, let's say, so it'll be something like, there was 2001, and there was a big response to that, the 9/11. There was the world financial crisis in 2008. Will we be somewhere in the range of, less that or less than that, rather than a cataclysmic shift where, 50% of businesses go bankrupt and the whole world turns upside down? That's the kind of normal I think we're going to go back to. It's not going to be, if you look at a graph of how life has gone for the past 50 years, I think wherever we are in a few months from now, we'll be somewhere within that graph, not miles below it or miles above it. So in that sense, I think we'll go back to normal. Exactly where we'll go back to in the short run, I think remains to be seen. I don't think anybody can predict it right now. If they could, they would be making a poised to make a killing in investments, and I'm not. Now, what will happen politically going forward, I think is going to be really determined, as in all of these cases, by how this situation is understood. And I think those of us who value political freedom have to think about what caused this, what are the right kind of solutions in these kind of situations generally, what ought governments to be doing in times of crisis, but also more importantly, what ought to be going on when it's not times of crisis. And what has been going wrong such that we're kind of flat-footed in this situation, and it's perceived that there's this need for these kind, and maybe it's rightly perceived in some cases, that there are these needs for these kinds of stay-in-place measures and so forth. what is the cause of this? And I think that's something that we're going to have to think about. We're going to have to research. We're going to have to not jump to the first conclusions that seem plausible, given our ideology, that someone suggests something and yeah, that would fit perfectly with my worldview, so I'm going to jump on that, even though I don't know anything about the actual science here or the facts or what's going on in the economy. We have to, actually people are going to have to do this kind of research, understand this, and then be in a position to advocate for be in a position to interpret these events in light of the right political philosophy and a pro-freedom worldview. And I think as a philosopher, I could give the very basic essentials, the principles, to go back to Alejandro's question, in terms of which we can interpret this. But there's a whole lot of work, intellectual work, that needs to be done figuring out how those principles apply to this case, which includes both what should be done in these kind of cases and also understanding concretely what happened. So the principle is that all values come from reason, and reason requires freedom. And that leads to things like where an industry is unfree, it's going to face times of shortages. In crisis, it's going to be unable to adapt quickly. There's not going to be people who have well-founded but politically unpopular views are not going to be able to get their research financed. There's not going to be a way to fund at scale. Basically, the industry will become short-sighted. And I think that is a fact about how socialized industries work. And I think that we're seeing that medical preparedness has been short-sighted to a significant extent in this case. There are particular things that were known about, for example, that there was a real chance of a new coronavirus that would be spread efficiently and be more deadly developing. There was worry about that in the wake of the SARS and MERS outbreaks, but then the funding and interest in that kind of research dried up. Why was that? What kind of situation would make that and abilities to scale hospital beds and so forth more possible, happen more quickly, etc. We need to think about that from a perspective of belief in reason and belief in freedom, understanding the kinds of broad effects these can have, and then look for actual ways. And people, who are healthcare and analysts and doctors and so forth, and policymakers are going to need to figure out how those kinds of causal factors actually played in this crisis, and are need to be advocating for more freedom rather than less, and in light of this. But it's going to take actual real knowledge and work and thinking about it, not just assuming because freedom's good that therefore what particular measure would have served us in good stead.
Andy?
No, I think Greg did a really good job. I don't have anything to add.
Nikos, if you have anything to add.
Just one quick comment. There was an interesting article yesterday in the BBC. Actually, the topic was, why don't we have more ventilators? So the question was, why can't we switch very quickly to producing? And when I say we, basically I mean private companies. But what has happened in the UK, the government has actually asked private companies whether they can switch to voluntarily, let's say, to manufacturing ventilators, and then the government said we will buy them. And someone who works in one of these engineering companies said, and I quote, "Ventilators are less sophisticated than things like smartphones and Xboxes. But this is not a technical challenge, but a regulatory compliance challenge." So even in these days, when everyone wants basically to impose such limitations to freedom that, in my opinion, we haven't seen since 1945, even with this environment, most of the good solutions come from this initiative of what Greg and Andy described earlier, that when you are free, you can come up with solutions. Or we see news every time about private labs here and there trying to come up with tests. So I know it's not the time. I mean, you can see two ways. You can ask, and this is actually a question that I have for Andy and Greg. Quite often I think, is this really the time to fight this fight? Because people have this overload of information and worry whether their father or their mother is going to get sick? Or is this exactly the time where we have to go something like full in and make sure to people like, no, it's now that we have to stand up to these measures because now it's literally an issue of life and death.
Nikos, I was a little bit lost in your question. What was the question?
No, sorry, I was thinking out loud. So what I was saying is that we have more and more proofs as we speak that some of the best solutions to the crisis are happening from the private sector and from private initiative of people who are free. So what I was thinking is that as intellectual activists, on the one hand, I'm saying now is a good time, now is the best time to go full in and make the case for freedom. On the other side, I'm thinking that this is a period where people have this overload of information and they're mostly worried about whether their mother or their grandmother is going to get sick. And they say, well, now it's not the time. So although I understand that now it is the time because it's an issue of life and death, I don't know if during these times you can actually successfully fight, let's say, the battle of ideas. I mean, I remember reading, for example, Hayek's biography that around the Second World War, the liberal ideas were actually on a downstream, on a historical nadir. So at the time that totalitarianism was at its peak, the liberal ideas were at the, let's say, historical low. So anyway, it wasn't really, it was more like many questions, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. So just a few things occurred to me, and that is, before I even answer your question, I think a preliminary is, the proper role of government is to protect the rights and the lives of its citizens. And much as I hate to be quarantined or whatever, I think when you have evidence that that there's this objective threat to human life, I think it's the proper role of the government to do, in many cases, what it's been doing, quarantining, shutting down businesses. So I think I think that's morally upright, as long as we all understand these measures get lifted 100%, maybe more, once this crisis is over. That's one point. Now I get your point about people. Life and death emergencies, you're concerned with resolving the life and death emergency, not with the philosophy that might prevent these kind of emergencies in the future. So, but I do think as soon as the emergency is over, and hopefully that's within a month or so, the virus starts to dwindle and eventually peters out, as these things do, and hopefully the social distancing facilitates that. I think then is the perfect time to point out that we need what I was saying before: freedom of the mind, individual rights to protect freedom of the mind in the field of medicine, and every other field. We can point out the great medical advances that occurred during the capitalist era that don't happen under in the non-capitalist societies, and more broadly, the great advances of the mind that Ayn Rand talks about in Atlas Shrugged that happen under individual rights. I think as soon as the emergency is over, I think that's the perfect time to talk about this issue and the need. For instance, in the United States, the need to eliminate the FDA, which causes the delay in new drugs coming on the market. Sometimes drugs that are being used in other countries are not even allowed to be used by patients in the land of the free. I think the need to deregulate the medical research field. I think as soon as the emergency is over, which hopefully will be in a let's say in a month, I think that's the perfect time to argue for freedom of the mind in this field, in the field of medical research, and then expand it to every field.
Yeah, I think you have to distinguish what to do in a crisis and what to do after a crisis to understand its causes and what has to be done long-term to correct it. And I think philosophy has a role in both. And I also think specialized knowledge is necessary for both. So you can say on general grounds that all fields should be free, and so medicine should be free and the FDA shouldn't exist and so forth. And I think that's true. But if you're going to be analyzing its role in this particular crisis, right, then you're going to need to know something about, well, what drugs were there that weren't produced or couldn't have been produced. You're going to need to know something about that sector of the economy, that field, and there need to be experts on that. So one thing this might do is motivate you to learn more about that, become an expert on that, or find experts on that. Right? But yeah, after the crisis is over, we're going to need to think about how to understand it, how to advocate for what we think will prevent these crises in the future, and how to integrate it with our other knowledge and views about politics and other issues. During the crisis, I think people have to be thinking about what can be done, what can be done now while we're in this emergency, and saying, well, we should get rid of the FDA now, or we should have got rid of it 10 years ago, or I never started it, or whatever, is not very helpful right now. Maybe we should be advocating for specific measures, like the FDA should fast track approval of this or that, or it should allow people to be using certain drugs without yet being approved. But it seems to me that it's doing all of those things that it can do right at the moment. I don't know all the details. So to know about that, you have to also know something about the field. Now, I'm not an expert in medicine at all. I do have a lot of friends who are doctors. My wife is a doctor, and one of my friends is a real specialist in pandemic preparedness. We talked about Ayn Rand. Also, another of my friends is an emergency doctor in New York City who's right on the front lines of this. So I've been talking to them about what they think and what things are making their jobs harder. And on the basis of that, I have some ideas about specific political measures that should be taken. And insofar as I'm competent to, I'm advocating for that. People who know more about it than me and can be more confident should be making those kinds of cases. And in general, there's a question as to, so I'll mention a couple of things. I think testing should be much more widely available, and therefore people producing tests should be freed up. I think a big part of the catastrophe here has been the restrictions on who was allowed to test, who was allowed to produce tests. There have been tests that hospitals are able to carry out. They've literally not been allowed to carry out in the United States. And so for that reason, we've been flying blind on this for weeks and weeks, when we could have had this much more under control if we were doing those tests. At least this is what people who would normally do these tests in emergency rooms or order them are telling me. And I believe that that's true. And it's consistent with what I've read in the news. So there are things like this. There's also there's a law in America about how emergency rooms function, that you're not allowed to tell people to leave, basically, until you've done a certain type of examination on them. And as a result of this, people are panicked and flooding into the emergency rooms, and they're unable to treat the people they should be treating because they have to cycle through all of these people. That law should be suspended, and there's some precedent for that. So, these are kind of specific things that I'm learning from talking to doctors about what's preventing them from doing their job. The other issue is, how is this going to end? What will be the end of this crisis? And how can we get out of it? And Andy's hopeful that it'll be in a month. Fabian says he doesn't understand how or when it will be over. I think hardly anyone understands how or when it will be over. And this is a real crisis in political leadership, that people aren't communicating what time frame they're taking these measures on, including communicating that they don't know, but when they expect to know. I think governments are reacting in a kind of panic mode, and that's a real problem. And if you have the philosophical knowledge and platform, and especially specific expertise in pandemics and things like that, to advocate for, to come up with what the right policy should be in this kind of situation now, and to advocate for them, I think you should be doing that. And most of us don't have that knowledge. We should try to get, those of us who are interested in doing work in this field should try to learn more about it. But there were real questions. England is taking, or has been taking, the Right Turn course, a very different approach than the United States is taking. There's issues about what China did versus what South Korea did, which of those is a better model and which worked better, why they worked to the extent that they did. Some of it is this kind of, lockdown everybody procedure, which is basically the Chinese model, but the South Korean model is more a model of testing as many people as possible and very selectively controlling their movements. Could we be doing something more like that here? To what extent was the testing that was done, rather than the general locking down, what was effective in China? People who are really studying this, and I think Ayn Rand is one of them, or there are others, have been really paying attention to this kind of stuff and trying to work it out. People who are policy advocates within this field and who know something about pandemic preparedness ought to be doing that kind of work and referring to their philosophical principles as they do it, and to help guide them in it, which is what I think Amish is doing. And he's advocating for policies both on television and so forth, and also, the think tank he's part of is arguing out what should be done and what recommendations should be made. And a lot of other people are doing that. Those of us who don't know enough to be doing it now should take this as an occasion to recognize that there's this kind of work to be done in the world, and that's a career you can go into as a doctor or as a journalist or as a policy person, and there are analogous careers in other fields. There's a real need for people who are thinking both with philosophical principles and with expert domain knowledge in different fields that are called on to respond in a crisis. And if you're not one of them, you have to kind of, to some extent, sit this one out and do your best to call attention to the people who, as far as you can tell, are experts and are giving good advice. But if this makes you come to value that kind of work and knowledge more, then when the crisis ends, you should be thinking about, how can I act on that value? Maybe that's a career I want to go into. Maybe I can find a way to support other people who are in that kind of career, whether in medicine or in other fields.
I would say the previous question bridges very well with Anton's question. So I would suggest
Yeah, before we go to Anton's question, just Joseph, do you have any follow-up to your question?
Not really. I've been studying quite a bit of finance, so I'm not as optimistic as many other people here. But no, the question is answered.
Let me say one other thing about the quarantine issue, reacting to Andy. I'm less sanguine about it, Andy, than I think you are. If I thought our political leaders know what they're doing, they've got this under control, and shutting down business for a month or a few weeks will flatten the curve and so forth in a way that will head off the worst of these effects. And they've calculated the consequences to people's lives of doing this, and shown that, yes, to protect people's lives in the short term, we need to take this extraordinary measure, and but it's only going to be for a month, and we'll be able to get back on track after that, and so forth. I too would be happy to stay inside for the month. Not happy, but content to do it, and I wouldn't feel like my life is being derailed for it. But a lot of the evidence on this suggests that that's not known, that it's that there are going to be pretty big consequences to this kind of way of arresting all of life for a time, and that to really have an effect, it would have to be a lot longer than a month. The study that came out from what is it, the Imperial College? Is it the Imperial College? Anyway, a British research group on this said, you'd really need to do it. We think until a vaccine came out, which is going to be something like 18 months, to stop having a surge that would be just as bad at the end of it. Maybe if we do it for 3 months, we'll be able to write out the worst of it, and a lot of people will die, but it would be better than if we didn't do it at all. But 3 months of no one leaving their house, most businesses shut down, I mean, that's a really big deal. And there's not sufficient talk about, what kind of consequences is that going to have on health and wealth, and including psychological health. People go crazy and kill themselves, and will there be riots? So I am not confident in I think there are situations in which these stay-at-home orders would be valid, but I think we have to really think about how a responsible government would be handling that, and it would be saying, it's for this time period. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. Or at the very least, there's a lot we don't know now. We're issuing this order for 2 weeks because we're trying to figure this thing out. And at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to tell you what we figured out, and we'll have new instructions. Now it's there's a real sense of flying blind, and I think the government is defaulting on a responsibility in doing that.
That's particularly the case in the UK. So the government said this is not herd immunity. Epidemiologists like Amy said, no, this is actually exactly herd immunity. And the problem is that I think who am I to think? But I judge with my poor judgment on the topic that this might make sense, but if you don't let people know that, look, with the current measures, our best case scenario is that some of you will be actually infected. I think, as Greg said, it would be very honest to communicate this to people, that we have this strategy, but this entails this risk for you. Whereas doing it and saying, no, this is not herd immunity, and then later kind of basically telling people, no, actually that's what it was, I think this is indeed very dishonest. Although otherwise the UK is doing some interesting things, I think this was dishonest. So Anton asked an interesting question. So I think the first part was answered, although Andy and Greg can go back to it. So I think there is a consensus in the panel that the government could shut businesses. Now, what is the threshold where the government can shut a business? So I don't remember. I think it was Greg in another podcast, but I'm not sure. Someone said, like, if it's a zombie apocalypse situation and the mere fact that someone is within 2 meters from you is gonna basically give you something that's gonna kill you, then yes, you would have the right of self-defense to use force to keep this person away. So in such a scenario, it's like a clear cut. It's the end of the axis where the government should quarantine. Now, where the threshold is, I think it's another question. But Anton has a second part of his question, which is, should then the government support these businesses financially? So basically, today, the government is telling to a small business, you have to shut down. When the government gives the permission to this small business to reopen, should the government compensate this small business? And actually, I would add, would this also be the case if it was something that we would all agree, let's say, that it has gone above the threshold of an objective crisis, which is something which there's a very high risk, and even higher risk than the current crisis?
So it's a good question, and I think it's one that with a lot of these questions, you have to think about how would it work in a freer society and how should it work in our society. So in our society, the government's bailing out all kinds of people all the time, and it seems like particularly egregious to fail to bail out these people when you're bailing out everyone else and you're the one who told them to close. So, you know, I could see a real case for doing it in our society, even if you wouldn't do it in a fully free society. And you'd expect that in a freer society, there would be more insurance and other things in place for this kind of scenario. But as an argument for perhaps doing it even in a free society, if you imagine putting somebody under quarantine, like there's the case of Typhoid Mary, right? This was a woman who had typhus. She was an asymptomatic carrier. She wasn't sick, but she could go around and get other people sick. And she was working as a cook and getting all these people sick. And they said, you can't work as a cook, and she worked as a cook anyway. And so they arrested her and put her on some island, and now she's not able to interact and engage in her livelihood. So the government prevented her from interacting and engaging in her livelihood properly because she couldn't do it without endangering other people. But then because it was in effect imprisoning her, right, it had to feed her. You have to feed someone if you put them in prison. And I think it had an obligation to treat her better than it would treat just some random criminal who purposely was hurting other people. Now, in her case, she was being reckless and irresponsible, so it's more complicated. But if, the government is saying this business has to close now, it's in the effect equivalent of putting it in a quarantine. If it was an individual business, it was doing that too. In an emergency measure, I think there's a good argument that it would owe it some kind of restitution. When it's a whole sectors of the economy, plausible, I would need to think more about that.
Let's say one thing quick. I'm not an economist any more than I am a medical person, but I wonder from an economic standpoint if the best thing the government can do for these businesses is to give them a tax break rather than some kind of handout. I mean, it's a question for free market economists, like Richard Salzman and people like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was the better solution, for them. And I do think the government owes them something in that regard.
Now that you mentioned
one other thing about this whole issue, Nikos, because you're talking about the threshold at where the government can shut things down or order quarantines or whatever. I think there's an additional issue of the threshold to the manner in which they do it. What kind of information they convey, for what amount of time they do it, how transparent they are. So I think that's as important as the threshold. And there might be different thresholds with different manners of doing it. So part of what's the problem in the case in America, so right now where I live, all the restaurants are closed. You're not allowed to be out past 8 p.m. at night and so forth. It's not just, is this virus deadly enough and contagious enough to warrant this, but have they explained sufficiently what they're doing, why they're doing it, on what time scale, so that people can, as best as is possible given the situation, make plans for how to lead their lives. make plans for, well, what should I do with my business? Should I order or not order, food that I would sell next month from now if I'm a restaurant? All these kinds of thinking people have to do. If you're going to shut people's lives down, you owe them as much transparency as is possible about what's going on, and I don't think we're getting that sufficiently. I mean, some municipalities are doing better than others.
So, Nikos, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks.
So we have a couple of hands raised. We'll take both comments one after the other, and then we'll go back to the panel, and then back to the two people who have comments or questions for follow-ups. So, Ayn, you are unmuted.
Hi, Andy and Greg.
Hey, Ayn.
My question is kind of off topic, so it's not about the coronavirus, and but it did come out of a conversation about values. So I'm gonna read out a comment that my friend made and sort of got me thinking. So here's the comment. So the comment is, for example, I think that Howard Roark would kill himself immediately upon entering an inescapable concentration camp and would not resolve to find some inner strength or dignity. So I'll try to give some context to that. I hope you heard it, if I can repeat it. It is about, we were talking about life and values, and talking about if you valued life so much that if you were in a situation where you couldn't live, couldn't achieve particular values, that you would end your life. I hope that makes sense. So I don't know if you have any comments.
We'll just take Alejandro's question or comment, and then you guys can answer both.
I was wondering if you have seen the recent comments by Nassim Taleb on this, on the ethical action that one should take in the current coronavirus crisis, and if you have any opinion about that.
Is this the one where he says that some people might think that it's good for them if they get infected early because this means they're going to be more?
What I understood from the publication was that you should overreact.
Right. Yeah.
And avoid any kind of rational thinking. Just go full crazy, and that's the ethical solution because that's what the way that you're saving people.
My question on that would be, overreact based on what? I mean, because to link it with Amy's question, I mean, if you take it to the road, we say, oh, my overreaction is all hope is done. I'm just going to kill myself. Like, I can't see how you can overreact, but at the same time not go through reason. Doesn't make much sense to me. But anyway, I'll let the other two address this, but then I want to come back to, because I have a comment on Amy's question.
Yeah, I don't think that's a fair characterization of what Taleb was arguing. He did use some rhetoric that might suggest that. He talked about panicking and now's the time to panic and so forth, but I don't think he meant by panic act irrationally. I think it was a poor choice of words, and I think there are things in Taleb's ideology that pushes him towards that kind of type of, but he wasn't saying you should act crazily, not follow your own reasoning, and do what's actually an overreaction. I think what he was saying is this is a kind of situation where what's actually rational to do is something that would seem like an overreaction. You should treat this as a very serious, dire thing, even more so than if you just looked at your own individual risk factors you would think it is, because there's a chance of this leading to a kind of systemic failure that would then put you in graver danger. So, and this is the short kind of one-page position paper he put out a couple of days ago with someone. So at an abstract enough level, I think what being rational and thoughtful about your own risk is includes thinking about the fact that you're in a society, what you do has effects back on that society, and that society has effects on you, and that he's right to take those kind of things into consideration. I think he's wrong to think of that as overreacting and to be contrasting selfish and and action and so forth in the way that he is. But then whether he's right about what actions are the right ones in this particular case, I think requires more knowledge about. I'm not confident in my ability to assess that. I think he's overstating it, but I'm not sure.
I want to respond to something, Ayn, that you said, if I understood you correctly, the analogy of Howard Roark in a concentration camp where no escape was possible. I mean, if we could determine that no escape was possible, if that was possible to show that hope was completely misguided, then I certainly understand suicide as an option. But remember something: in the real world, I don't know that there are prisons that can't be escaped from. A good example of this would be Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist, and his famous book *Man's Search for Meaning*, who survived Auschwitz, and went on to live his life fulsomely. But Frankl's point, no surprise to objectivists, is that the people who survived the concentration camps were ones who held precious values, things that really animated their existences. His own desire was to rewrite the manuscript that he had written. I think the Nazis had destroyed. But somebody wanted to get back to their wife, or somebody loved their family. And in fiction, of course, Odysseus goes through hell to get back to Penelope and the son he's never met. So with different values in career and love and family can help people survive these kinds of concentration camps or these kinds of prisons. Maybe they don't escape. Maybe they just survive. Or maybe some people. I don't know that there were many escapes from the Nazi death camps. There might have been, and I just don't know about them. But there were people who claimed to escape from the Soviet gulags. I mean, if you ever read that book, The Long Walk, about the claim was that those people escaped from a Siberian gulag and then walked, across the Siberian tundra, across the Gobi Desert, across the Himalayas, and into India. It's an incredible story, which has been challenged for its truth. But it's a tremendous story. But people have escaped, I think, from various prisons and concentration camps. Other people have survived it. So to make the determination that it's hopeless to survive or escape, therefore suicide is the best option. Well, I mean, under those circumstances, I can understand if the best knowledge available is escape and survival is impossible, and I can never achieve the values I want, I can understand suicide as a choice. But it's a choice. It's an option for somebody in that situation. I don't think it's morally necessitated that Howard Roark in that situation is gonna commit suicide. But I think the more important takeaway from all of this, no surprise to us, is exactly what Frankl said from his experiences in surviving Auschwitz. Values are the great difference maker. The people held passionate values were much more likely to survive this kind of brutal incarceration and torture than the people who didn't.
Talking about values, there's a nice scene in Atlas Shrugged. I won't mention names so as not to spoil it. But again, in part 3, there are these two lovers, and the police is after the one, and he tells to the other, they're gonna get you because they will want to catch me. But if they put you in the torture chamber, correct me if I don't remember correct, but he says, I will kill myself immediately. And what he means is that you're my ultimate value. And once I see you in the torture chamber, and because they're gonna do horrible things to you and eventually kill you, this means that all hope is lost in terms of not hope, all values are lost. Therefore, then death is the only escape. So one could imagine an example where because the highest value is lost, then you take your own life. But in terms of the issue of hope, there's a very nice dramatization of it in a film called The Railwayman. It's the story of a prisoner of war who was in a Japanese concentration camp, and he's tortured by the KPI. He's waterboarded, and at some point he breaks, so he almost loses it. And the very next scene, he looks to the sky, and it's the US paratroopers falling. So it's very anticlimactic or anticlimactic, because usually in these stories, you realize that the end is coming, and the prisoners start cheering up, and then the regime falls. This guy literally, when he has lost everything, all hope, he looks to the sky, and the paratroopers are falling and are about to liberate him. So I think, yeah, while there's still hope, again, where's the threshold? It's a question, but while there's still hope, if you can, you hold on. Greg, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, one on the Atlas Shrugged scene, and then a more general point. I think in that particular Atlas Shrugged scene, it's not just that the lover would die, but that or would be tortured, but that the person's being alive would be what made that torture possible. And
Right.
so his life would be being turned against the central values to it. And that's why he says he would kill himself there. But let me say more about this issue of hope and values. And first of all, we've been talking about these kind of man-made catastrophes. You're in a concentration camp, you're captured by the Gestapo or whatever it is. But there are a lot of non-man-made ones that we're all likely to face, or we're more likely to face. You have a debilitating disease. You're losing, and you're losing your abilities, and you think you're not going to be able to do the things that make you happy and that your life consists in. People who you love die or are lost to you. Various ways in which your life can be depleted of the values you have or of your hope to achieve them, that we're going to, we're all likely to face some form of. Excuse me. I have a cough that I think is an ordinary postnasal drift cough, so people shouldn't worry about me in the time of COVID-19, but I do have to cough occasionally. Anyway, what was I saying? So there are these kinds of issues that we face. You have a degenerative disease, you're late in your cancer diagnosis. And I think, yeah, there are cases in all of these where it's reasonable for people to want to end their lives. And that's one reason why I think it's really important that the law allow people to have these kinds of choice over end of life decisions. But when we're thinking about when they're rational and when there's hope, we want to think about what we mean by your values are unavailable to you. So if you're somebody who was, I don't know, a good runner, and being a runner and your career as a runner was very important to you, like an athlete, like a marathon runner, and you hurt your leg, or you have, your leg amputated below a certain point or whatever, and you can no longer do the kind of running you used to do, and you're 40. Well, something, or 20, whatever it is, something that might have been a central value to you in your life has been lost. And if I asked you the day before, what's your life about? Maybe your answer was running. And now that's gone to you. Should you give up and kill yourself? Or you're a parent and your child or your wife or whatever, who is a central value to you, dies. And you say, these are the things that my life is most about, and they're gone to me now. Should I give up? And I think in those kind of cases, no, I don't think that's reasonable. I think you have to think in those kind of cases, I'm still a human being. This was the particular career I chose for myself. These were the particular people I wanted to live my life with. I was hoping my life would go this way. I was all in on making those values happen and promoting them while I could. But now that they've become impossible, or they've died, or I've lost them, there are other forms in which I can pursue something of what that meant to me. I can't be a runner anymore, but I could be a coach of running, or I could do some other career that means to me some of what running did. And I can invest in it in the way I have invested in, being an athlete. And it can have something of that meaning to me. I can start again. It's part of life that you'll lose people you love. And I can go on and find someone else. It's a horrible thing that shouldn't happen, that a child is lost, but there's still hope to make a life for yourself after that.
Nikos, do you have anything to add? If not, we'll go, if you or Andy have nothing to add. Do you guys have anything to add?
Nikos?
No, and that point on Atlas Shrugged was very correct. Yeah, it wasn't only that he would lose the value; it was that because of. But the general point is that. So actually, when Greg finds his voice, I want to ask him this question. So, would you say it's more of a kind of a subjective decision? I mean, I'm not using the term in, let's say, the scientific, philosophical way, but so if someone, his life is indeed running, and I mean, take again Howard Roark. Let's say that someone could guarantee to him that you're not going to be an architect, and someone is so overwhelmed by passion. Could we imagine someone losing his dream, actually saying this value is even higher than my life, because I'm so consumed by it and because I'm so passionate by it? Or could we say that no, that's because objectively life is the standard of value? So up to which point does this become, let's say, a decision based on each person's hierarchy of values? But where does this fit with the idea that life is actually the standard of value?
Well, I think there are a couple of aspects to this question. So insofar as you want to say is it subjective, I would say that the right thing to say is it's personal.
Personally,
which means that it's the kind of decision like, I, Nikos, choose to be a professor, but George chooses to be in finance, I think, and Ayn chooses to be in programming. It's like, this is the life I choose for myself. But if someone says, I choose the life of a bank robber, well, then no, that's not that, that's outside of the range of moral and possibly life-sustaining options, right? So likewise, you're going to choose in a way what things are important to you. But if it's like Snickers bars, I can't live without Snickers bars, and the company stopped making them, that's it for me, right? That would clearly be immoral. That would be the case of the bank robber. And I think likewise, if you're like a 20-year-old who some specific medical problem precludes you from pursuing a certain kind of career you wanted to pursue, but most other careers are still open to you, I think that would be irrational. That would be like, wouldn't be as crazy as I won't live without my Snickers bars, but it would be, I think, you would be dropping the context, and I don't think it would be rational. No, in the case of Roark, we'd have to think about why he can't be an architect and what that shows about the world that he's in. And does it show that it's a world where he can't achieve values, or just that it's a real tragedy that he can't have the value he wants? And I can't come up with a situation where he couldn't be an architect and yet he could be other things. So that's why I've picked examples where there's a particular physical disability. You want to be a track runner and you lose your legs or something like that. And now maybe you should be a wheelchair racer or something instead. But what kind of a world could you not be an architect in? Well, so one in which the political system doesn't permit it. But then I think what somebody like Roark would do is spend their lives working to fight that political system out of loyalty to that value. And they wouldn't give up on it, but they would say, okay, I can't be an architect now, but I can be someone who moves hell and earth either to get out of this country and takes great risks to do it, or to change this country so that I could do what I wanted. If it's not a political one, then what other one would it be? Something like he has some kind of problem with his hands and he can't draw, well, then he'll find a way to do it with, without his hands. Is it that he has some kind of mental deficit where he can't think to do architecture anymore? Like he's, well, then that's really horrifying. But then we have to think about, well, what can he still do? If he's such that he can't function cognitively and he's, whatever, and then maybe that's a situation where he wouldn't want to go on. Or is it like, I don't know, some kind of very specific deficit to do with architecture somehow? And then, we have to think about what kind of life is still possible to him and what would he make of that?
Can I also ask a question to you or Andy?
Please say something, because I get Greg's point about the context here. But if I, in some conceivable universe, let's say the Howard Roark type really angry, let's say, or Hitler. And so now he's determined to torture him. He could kill him outright, but he wants him to suffer first. And so he begins to remove one after another life's highest values. So you're going to be followed by the KGB every second of your life, and you will never be able to sit down and draw, and Dominique is going to be removed from your life, and you'll never see her again. And you start to withdraw the life's major values here. Unless you can find some hope that you might be able to escape, to a freer country, or you and Dominique together might be able to escape. If you can, let's put it this way, it's the context of knowledge is important, right? If in the best knowledge available to you, the life's major values have been irrevocably withdrawn from your life, and there's no hope whatever of restoring them in the future in any conceivable form, then I think suicide does become an option. I think it's a rational decision, and morally, all the blame should get heaped on the perpetrators who forced the Howard Roark type into this kind of Sophie's choice situation. That there's no choice that Roark makes in this situation that could be considered immoral. It's morality ends at the point of the gun. So I think suicide as a relief from the terrible pain and the ennui of living under these brutal conditions. I think suicide becomes a release from this, and I do see it as a rational option at that point.
Can I ask a question, Andy? Do you remember this scene in We the Living where Kira learns that she's expelled from the university, and she thinks, or I think she tells to Andre, he says, well, that means I'm never going to build bridges and all that stuff. So basically she's explaining how her dream is shattered. She takes it in a way that in common language we say stoically, although I know that's not what it actually means. Is this because, and at that point she doesn't seem to have a plan of revolt against the system or something. Is this because her highest value is actually Leo, her boyfriend, so that's still there? Or is it something else, if you remember that scene?
Well, I think if you look at We the Living, I think it's a good example. People who, rational human beings who live a rich and fulfilled life often do so with multiple values. They love the field of their career. They love their husband or wife, their boyfriend or girlfriend. They love their children. They love their dearest friends. Life is a rich life. Greg's and Aristotle's cause. This is a life of eudaimonia, right? A flourishing, a flourishing all around life. So Kira is that kind of person. She has the career in engineering, and she's deeply in love with Leo Kovalensky. So notice what happens when the state withdraws both of those values from her life. Then she knows there's no possibility of flourishing life or self-fulfillment in the Soviet Union, and she has to get out. She's willing to risk her life to do so. Tragically, she's murdered by the Soviet state. But the state has diabolically succeeded in withdrawing and subtracting from her life the two enormous values. At which point, the risking her life is not suicide, because there's a chance that she'll escape and be able to restore, not Leo, he's spiritually crushed, but to be able to restore, tragically so, to restore engineering as a career, and hopefully in the future love again. But if Kira chose to commit suicide in that kind of, well, actually, I think the rational choice is to do exactly what she did, the attempt to escape. But if it was completely hopeless to escape, and and again, best context of knowledge was hopeless to escape, I don't think there's any moral blame to be placed on Kira for committing Kira Ivanova if she commits suicide. All the moral blame goes on the oppressors, on the goddamn communists. So yeah, I think suicide under certain conditions is a understandable choice. One last point to this: a little known hero that should be more known. In fact, I'm going to talk about him on my on my Facebook live show. Is Samuel Sharp, who was the leader of a slave rebellion in Jamaica in the 1830s. And when the British brutally suppressed it, and they were going to hang Sharp on the gallows. And he had one of the the greatest lines, you know, ever, and something to the effect that, you know, death is preferable to, you know, to I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life in slavery. And I can understand that. If it's hopeless to escape slavery, in best context of knowledge, best knowledge available to you, it's hopeless to escape slavery. Death is a release from the constant pain. If the British didn't hang them, and if you know, if there was no escape from slavery, I wouldn't blame that guy for committing suicide, you know, in that set of circumstances.
I wouldn't either, but I would want to take some of them with me, as I think he did, right?
He did. Oh yeah, he did. Yeah.
So I think that, you know, I'm not going to blame someone if they kill themselves in a concentration camp, but, you know, try to do it. You know, I rush the guards. Try to get out, even if you're almost certain to fail, and take some of them with you. I mean, I think that's.
I like that idea, Greg. I like that.
Can I ask one more question on this? Razi, feel free to stop me because the topic.
Well, can we maybe go back to Ayman and Alejandro, see if they have any more comments or questions? Then we'll go back to Nikos. So, Ayman, you're unmuted.
I don't have any questions. I really like the answers and the back and forth. So that was, I think what was very clarifying, there was 2 points that were very clarifying to me, which were the point that is, the fact that you cannot pursue your values anymore. That's what makes the sort of the decision of ending your life, you know, a rational choice in some cases, because you're talking about something, it has to be very, very bad. And for me, the whole conversation came up because of the fact that, for me, hope was not lost. I can't imagine a situation where I would decide to kill myself rather than try to escape or try something. So there was very few examples I could think of.
So when we talk about you can't pursue your values, I think we have to add you can't project and pursue values.
Yeah.
It's not like you have some set list of values, concrete values, like I'm going to be an engineer, I want to have a house in the suburbs, I want to have 3, you know, like some list of things you're trying to achieve in your life. And then you're like, well, can I get these? You're always coming up with new ideas for what to do with yourself, changing, modifying, revising, adding to your list of what to pursue. So you find out you can't get this thing you like, your favorite restaurant's going to close and there's nothing to do about it. Oh, I can't pursue my values anymore. Or even someone you love dies. Oh, well, now I can't pursue that value. The issue is it such that you can't find and pursue values at all? Not that particular values get knocked off. Even particular important values. Most of us have or will survive one of the most tragic values losses possible, which is the loss of someone we really love. And that will happen to most of us, or has, right? And people can and should go on in light of that. Now, if what happened was some situation where no kind of human relationship would be possible to you ever again at all, and that's a very different thing than, this person I love died, but I can, get on with my life, as much as my life will be severely impacted by that loss.
Nikos.
Right, one follow-up question. So I liked Greg's comment, but try to take as many with you. But there's this big discussion in Greece on our resistance to Nazis. So specifically, if you grow up as a leftist, the Greek partisans are like folk heroes, and we have nice songs, and they're the closest you can get as you grow up to the figure of some heroes. But then there's this, let's say, historical revisionism by the right, which says that actually resistance not only was futile, because you ended up killing fewer Germans than those who died from, a sickness or the typhoid, whatever. By the way, I'm not sure if this is historically accurate, but let's say for the sake of the discussion it is. Therefore, all you managed to do is lead the Germans to do atrocities as a, as a punishment, as a repercussion, how is it called? And of course, I realize that when a dictatorial regime commits crimes, it is on the regime. But for example, in a concentration camp, it was this idea that for, I think, even if you attempted to escape, and whether you fail or not, then 10 people would be put in a room and basically be there, left there to rot alive, which is like one of the worst possible things. So at what point would you say that is resistance, let's say, at what point does it become the moral thing to do? And at what point does it become futile, but also you need to think what's going to happen to other innocent people? So I'm probably not going to succeed and other people are going to suffer. But at the same time, my consciousness tells me this is what you have to do.
Well, morally, I think, Ayn Rand's absolutely right when she says, morality ends at the point of a gun. I think whatever choice the freedom fighters make to fight the oppressor, even if it means reprisals and killing of innocent people, or not to fight because we don't want innocent people to be killed. I think morally I think it becomes a tactical decision here at this point. I think morality doesn't apply to them in that situation. The moral judgment gets heaped upon the Nazis for pushing them into that situation. That's the Sophie's choice, situation. Any choice they make, the freedom lovers, the freedom fighters, is blameless. All the opprobrium gets heaped upon the heads of oppressors. It becomes a tactical decision, and I think, as a practical point, as what's the best way to promote our liberty and our lives, and I think then it becomes a practical calculation. I don't think there's any moral blame to be placed on those who fight for freedom, even if the Nazis are going to perpetrate reprisals, and I don't think there's any moral blame to be placed on those who refuse to fight because they're concerned about the innocent lives that will be lost. So I think morality ends at the point of a gun, I think, is a brilliant insight on Ayn Rand's.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about the morality ends at the point of a gun concept is it applies principally to moral obligations between people. That is, at the point of a gun, there's no issue of what do you owe to me or I owe to you. There's no social morality. And it also applies to the issue of morality sketches out what kind of life you should be leading and what the steps are to take to do it. And you can't do that under force. So all of that guidance for, you should be productive. Well, you can't at the point of a gun. You should be independent in your action as well as your thinking. And you can't do that. Reason matters. And you should be rational. And the knowledge of what a good life would consist of that you can aim at, I think that remains as a kind of a guide star for you. So yeah, I agree. Issues of blame are out of the question when someone's under force. They have to make do. But we could still think about what would be rational decision making in this horrible circumstance. I'm getting indications that my connection was unstable for a while. Have you guys heard what I've been saying?
Yes, just that your camera disappeared for a while, but you heard what you say.
Okay, so then I would say in the kind of concentration camp case or the Greek cases, I agree with Andy that it's these are tactical decisions, but you have to think it's morality insofar as it applies at all says be rational in making these decisions. So, for example, in the concentration camp case, there was a specific hope that people were. You can't make a life for yourself in a concentration camp, but maybe you can escape. And more to the point, because this was more possible for most people, maybe you could ride it out until liberation, right? And most of those concentration camps were eventually liberated. And there were people who managed to ride it out in them until liberation. I mean, my grandfather was in the party that liberated Dachau, right? And there were all kinds of movies where you see the paratroopers coming in, as Nikos said, or the Italian movie Life is Beautiful, and you see the camp getting liberated, right? So you have to think about what can I do to protect myself and my fellow inmates here, give us the best chance of getting through to liberation. But the issue is there are going to be, or there can well be, irreconcilable conflicts of interest between you and the other inmates in these kind of situations that there can't be under freedom. Like maybe you think the best way to write it out is to turn informant or something like that for me, but then I would be sacrificing them. And that's a kind of situation that would not arise under freedom, but could arise in this kind of a situation. And there's nothing to say about what to do in that situation.
So since no one has a coronavirus question, I'll ask this as my last question, I promise. So in what I consider his interesting existentialist phase, Jean-Paul Sartre, around when he wrote Existentialism, Humanism, which has some, let's say, pro-life messages, he has this quote which is assigned to him. Again, I'm not sure how accurate it is. He says, even in the concentration camp, you are free. And what he meant is, for example, exactly what Greg said. You are free to decide whether you're going to be turned to an informer. So do you think there is, so yes, you haven't got free judgment, and yes, values are not just hanging out in the air, they're related to your life, but wouldn't you say that even in this environment, there is something moral in not becoming an informer and keeping your integrity?
No, I don't think there's a way to say what to do in that situation, and it's going to have to be so different for everybody. Maybe you have children depending on you to get out of this, or other kinds of great things you want to do when you get out of the camp. And
Greg, I think we lost you, but I absolutely agree. Did we lose Greg?
No, he still appears participating, but we lost his picture.
All right. Well,
yeah.
Anyway, I certainly I agree. It's so contextual. I mean, if in your most rigorously honest judgment, your survival depends on becoming an informant, then I think that's the right thing for that person to do, especially like, and Greg's absolutely right. You might have children, the Nazis or the communists might have your children, and they're going to torture them to death unless you do, what they want. I mean, again, you do what you have to for the survival of you and your family. The moral condemnation is 100% on the murderers here, who force you into this brutally, unlivable situation. So I don't think there's any way to say in under those circumstances that somebody becomes an informant that he's lacking integrity, or there's some tarnish on his moral character. I don't agree. It's dangerous, because if the other inmates realize what you're doing, they'll kill you. But you do what you have to do for the survival of yourself and your family. It's an unlivable situation. The Nazis or the communists, the ones morally responsible for this. You guys are familiar with Sophie's Choice, right? With William Styron's story. You guys should read it, because Sophie was a mother. She was a Jew, and she had children, and the Nazis put her in a situation where you have to choose to murder one of your children yourself, or else we're going to kill them all. And I think it's a really good. It's brutal, but it's a good illustration of Ayn Rand's point about that morality's purpose is to guide us to live. In the context where that's impossible, there's no morality to guide Sophie, and there's no moral judgments that could be made upon her. All the moral judgments, of course, get heaped upon the Nazis in that situation. It's a brutal story that I think illustrates Ayn Rand's theme beautifully.
Andy, can you write in the chat the name of because I hadn't heard of that story before.
Yeah, but how do I do that? I mean,
you go at the bottom where it says
I'll write it.
Oh, okay. Razi knows the story.
So Andy, Greg, and Nikos, if you have any final comments.
No, just to say thanks to the participants and thanks to the other two speakers, because I think it clarified my thoughts on the topic quite good. So
I'm actually in the chat, Nikos, doing this for you, so you congratulate me on my mastery of technology.
I got knocked off because my computer crashed. It turned out it wasn't even the network. But I'm back now. From what I heard, I agreed with what Andy was saying about the Sophie's Choice kind of situation and morality ending where a gun begins. I just don't think you can judge someone in that situation. You can only say what you would do and why. And this is a situation where differences in personal values matter. And as for Sartre, I mean, he's making the metaphysical point that you do have metaphysical freedom and that your choices aren't determined, but you don't have any kind of freedom in the moral sense of freedom, in the sense that it's valuable. And yeah, you can, talk about why you would make one choice rather than others, but the context to morally evaluate those choices, to say that yours is the right one and mine was the wrong one, or vice versa, just doesn't apply. So in the Sartrean sense, you are, in effect, in that kind of horrible situation, forming what your priorities are and what kind of person you are in a way by making a choice between one thing and the other. But it's a choice you should never have to make. And it's not the kind of choice that morality tells you what to do about. So that fact doesn't have the moral significance that Sartre thought it had. The fact that we have free will there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
So I think there's a tremendous value to what we do every Wednesday, which is meeting in real life. But one of the great advantages of meeting online is that we can have people who are not in London join us. So massive thank you to Andy, Greg, and Nikos. And once things go back to normal, I know Andy and Greg are ready to get on one of the first planes, and we'll launch our weekly panels, and Nikos is ready to get on, maybe not one of the first trains, but a few weeks in. And for now, we will do this every Wednesday. I haven't posted it yet, but I will be posting everything on the London Ayn Rand Meetup. People who are not in London can sign up, and I will send an email right before the event with the Zoom link. So it'll be every Wednesday at 7 p.m. London time. And we will still have the event that was scheduled for Monday, Heroism, Happiness, and a Search for Meaning, with Andy and Dr. Ashley Frawley, chaired by Nikos. That will take place via Zoom as well. So please sign up for that for Monday.
Yeah, that's a much better, or at least to me, much more appealing topic, heroism and happiness, rather than talking about this freaking virus. But, so I'm looking forward to that, Razi. That's gonna be fun.
Well, we also have, I have boxes of Andy's new book on heroism.
To me to sign it from New York.
Yeah, well, we will have those books for sale once we have live events. And well, as I said, we're ready to launch them, and for anybody who likes what we do and wants to see more of it, I encourage you to support us. I know this is probably not the best time for most people, but anybody who can, you can join the Ayn Rand Center membership program. I just posted the link on Zoom, and anybody who's watching the recording of this on YouTube, there will be a link in the description. So thanks again to everybody, and see you next week.